Hello and welcome to another episode of the Accession Everything Service Management podcast. I'm Daniel Gilby, joined as always by my co-host Sunil Dougal.
Hello.
And today we're speaking with the ITSM People. We've got Tim Mills joining us once again, and we're really pleased to have his colleague David Barrow. David, thank you very much for taking time out to speak with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
No worries at all. Now, Sunil, I know you've got a bit of a preamble to set the scene for this session, so I'm going to pass the mic to yourself.
Thank you very much, Dan. So I'll try and keep the preamble as quick as possible, only the first 30 to 35 minutes or so. So I think what we wanted to talk about with you guys today is because obviously ITSM People don't approach service management from a tooling perspective as Accession does, and in many ways as technology vendors do. So your insight here, I think, is very valuable and different, right, to our own. So what we wanted to talk about really was that this sort of position that we have in the ITSM world or ESM world at the moment, where we have customers some customers struggling to do basic things well. And on the flip side, you have vendors who are increasingly speeding up the innovation, shall we say, of advanced capabilities. They are pushing that agenda harder than perhaps they ever have done before. So you have some vendors like ServiceNow throwing everything into this sort of agentic AI bucket. You have other vendors like Freshworks, Freshservice, and Halo talking about running basic ITIL processes out of the box very easily. Implementation cycles are, a few weeks, not months or years. So you have this sort of dual idea of on one hand, do the simple things really well and really easily. On the other hand, we've got this really advanced capability. So what we thought would be good would be to talk about perhaps how you guys would advise customers. So, putting yourselves in the shoes of the customer, how to manage and understand their own requirements and how capable they are today or could be tomorrow to adapt some of the different features that vendors are going to market with. Should they be buying into the ServiceNow way of thinking and go full on agentic AI, or should they be tackling, dare I say it, Tim, some of the basics before they start the more difficult things? So I think that's the sort of premise of today's conversation. Hopefully that works. So the first question to you guys, and I'm not quite sure who'll pick it up, but the first question to you guys is, so let's assume you're talking to a customer who was unhappy, dissatisfied with their existing tool set, and they think they need to make an investment in tooling. That doesn't necessarily mean investing in a new tool. It could be more investment in the one that they already have, but they've come to the conclusion that actually there needs to be some kind of sea change. How would you go about helping them understand what that investment should look like? Where should they start?
I'll pick that up if that's all right with everyone. Yeah. Firstly, thanks for having us on, Sunil and Daniel, again. It was an absolute pleasure and a bit of a giggle last time. Maybe it'll be a bit of a giggle this time. We'll wait and see. So to answer your question, we did talk a little bit about this last time we all got together. There is a classic statement: "Don't buy what you don't need," right? And we see a lot of customers buying what they don't need, and the scenario that you just explained obviously isn't uncommon. A lot of organizations will go and buy a tool and typically not keep on top of the development of that tool. It doesn't matter what the tool is, but in no time at all, the tool is deemed to be old and of no use, when actually the tool itself may well be absolutely fine, but everyone's just got annoyed with it and gone, "Oh, I don't know what I want it to do, therefore we need to go and get a new tool." And sometimes the conversation is exactly as you've described. They might not need a new tool, right? In fact, most tools can do a lot of good stuff. It's just it hasn't been kept on top of in terms of the product management, development roadmap, and so on. So it's not an uncommon problem for a customer to start a conversation with us and say, "We want a new tool." And the obvious place to start for us is assessing where we're at today and where we're trying to get to. And we'll always come at it from the people. The technology is irrelevant from our perspective, at least at this stage. What are you trying to achieve as an organization? And when we say as an organization, that means let's think about what the business is trying to achieve as well, not just IT. Okay. So we always do try and steer our clients and those conversations down a certain path, which is where are you at today and where are you trying to get to over the next X years? And that's a much more important conversation than let's start looking at tools, because we don't know what tool is going to be a good fit for you. You might need ServiceNow, or you might be absolutely fine with some mid-market tool that comes in at a different price point, and it may well do everything that you need it to do. And the total cost of ownership and the management of that tool might be better aligned to you as an organization, whether that's about the functionality of the tool or just the management of that tool, over that period of time. So we often start with let's think about what you're trying to achieve and by when. And then, and only then, would I suggest we start thinking about, well, the tool that you've got today, actually, could we reconfigure that to do all these things that you're talking about that you need to do or want to do? Or if the damage is done, sometimes the PR, it's gone, right? It doesn't matter, right? We need a new tool because we've told people we're going to change the way that we're going to do them work, and so we've got to go and get a new tool. So sometimes the damage is done, and that means we do need to go and get a new tool. It might be that the tool's got a really similar set of functionality than the tool you've got today. It might just look ever so slightly different. And sometimes a client will say to us, can you make it look like the old tool, which is quite comical in itself. But that, so that's a really common conversation for us to have with clients. But we'll always try and steer them down what are you trying to get to and why and by when. And then we can help you think about what a new tool might look like. Have you got anything to add to that, David, just out of interest?
Yeah, I think you've summed it up really well. And I guess the crux of what you're saying is we try and help them avoid the knee jerk. So there's that knee jerk reaction to a problem, but they've not really thought about it in the context of their organization as a whole. So you need to look at, how is this going to map towards the future of your organization? Do you even know what that looks like yourselves? And I think another thing that in the past I've seen organizations be guilty of, and frankly I've been guilty of myself, because at the heart of what I do, I'm a service management person who loves technology. So it's really easy to get sucked into that shiny new thing. And it's our job to stop organizations from getting sucked into that. Just because it's shiny and brilliant and glowing today doesn't mean it's going to be that way in a few years' time. And it doesn't mean what you've already got can't be polished up, can't be improved, and itself can't be shiny and glowing in the future too. So I guess to add to what Tim said, avoid the knee jerk and look to understand whether what you've got can be glowing in the future. And if it can't, then consider what you need to define and implement in the future.
That's
the right tool.
As I said, it's probably another good example of that, David, where you've recently helped an organization redevelop their existing tool set to make it shiny and new. That is possible, right? And you can, providing it's doing the right stuff and you go and remarket it and all the benefits of it, that's okay as an outcome, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Interestingly, we ran a poll a few months ago on LinkedIn asking if organizations have got a service management strategy, and 31%, I think, of organizations said they either hadn't got one or they've got one that they never looked at. So how can you possibly decide in that scenario? How can you go and choose a tool? How do you know what you're trying to get to? Most, as we know, right? You know more than I do, Sunil and Daniel. Most tools do the same stuff, broadly speaking. So, what are you trying to get to? And if your existing tool can do all this great stuff, why not just use that? You don't need to jump into a new situation with a new tool, because there's all the cost of change and all that kind of stuff that needs to go with it as well.
That's an amazing stat, 31%. Do you think, Dan, 31% without an ITSM strategy? Wow.
Or some people said they've got it, but they just never looked at it.
What was that percentage? Was that part of the 31%, Tim?
Say that again, sorry?
Was that the people who have one but never referred to it, was that part of the 31%, or was that an additional statistic?
I think it was 25% hadn't got one, and it was like 6%
Right.
had got one but never looked at it.
Wow.
Yeah, which is interesting in itself for sure. Like, how can you possibly think about where you're trying to get to, whether that's around your tools, your people, your process, your roadmap, your operating model, if you're just kind of bumbling along? How can you go and choose a tool? No wonder tools are getting outdated and there's so many people switching from one tool to the next. Where are you going? Like, where are you trying to get to?
Just to pick up on your comment about, as we've discussed, a lot of these tools do very similar things, right? Obviously, there's differences, but in the main, the core functionality is there for a reason, right, across a number of tool sets. In this hypothetical scenario we're discussing now, then, how often or how prevalent do you think it is that actually they're not dissatisfied with the tooling, but it's actually the vendor relationship that they're not really best pleased with for whatever reason? Just would you give a view on that, perhaps, David, Tim?
I'll let David answer that. I mean, I might chip in, but I'll let David jump in on that one if you want, David.
You'll definitely chip in, Tim. I can guarantee it.
Certainly.
Yep.
Well, relationships are key, aren't they? So, I mean, that is often the case, that they've almost been left to rot as that organization, that technology organization, has gone off in pursuit of their next big win. And having been on that side of the table, I know how important it is to maintain relationships with your customers and bring them into the maturity of your organization. If you can build a great relationship with an organization as you're developing your product, you can actually use them to help you develop it, because they'll probably have the challenge that you're trying to develop into and out of. So relationships are always key. Communication, as in any walk of life, is key. But then I also see organizations that are just guilty of only ever being in contact with their vendor when something goes wrong or is about to go wrong. So I think it works at both ends into the spectrum. The organization needs to seek to maintain that relationship, and if they have a service management strategy and they've read it, they then need to work with their tooling vendor to explore how that vendor can help them deliver that strategy. But again, more often than not, they'll just phone them up when something's gone wrong or when it's about to go wrong, and nobody works well under duress. And therefore relationships suffer. So see it quite a lot. And I'll talk maybe more about this later, but if you can build a community of people that have a common goal, then you can avoid those situations going forward.
It's can I just jump in there, because I think that the avoid the knee-jerk comment that you made earlier, David, really applies on the vendor side as well, doesn't it? How often do you see a customer contact a vendor saying, I'm not very happy with whatever, and then the vendor comes in and they just present solutions? I've heard you say X, here is Y, and actually Y may or may not be the right thing, and it almost definitely isn't the right timing, right? It's probably 6 or 12 months too late, or possibly even more. That actually the knee-jerk happens on both sides, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If I can take that really quickly, only this morning I posted on LinkedIn that I was going to be recording a podcast today talking about tools, and I asked people the question, which one ITSM tooling myth would you like to bust? And the first comment was the myth that they can solve all of our business problems. And my response back was, and they say this before they've even asked what those problems are. And that person's come back and said 100% agree.
Yeah.
That's what happens. Again, it comes back to that. As technologists, we think we're solving the world's problems through technology, but we're probably creating more than we solve. But if we just sit down with people and ask them to tell us about their organization, what its aims are, what its goals are, even what its ethics are, we can then deliver tools that hopefully will meet those. And all too often we just go, here's the solution, throw it over the fence and get on with it. And they just put it to the side and shelve it.
We've obviously talked about AI before, and AI is here to fix all your problems, and it will fix a bunch of problems, providing that you're ready for AI in whatever form that takes, whether that's around having better data or better practices around that and so on. David mentioned a really interesting point a few minutes ago, and I've got a real world example of, where just the relationship with the vendor, not the tool, can be the pulling of the thread that unravels the whole thing. And we've got as I say, an example that we're working through at the moment with a client whereby it was the vendor, it was friction with the reseller rather than the tool that led to people getting more and more frustrated that they weren't getting the right development activity, or that the contracts, they thought the contract would cover them for X amount of number of development hours per month, and it wasn't playing out that way. So they start kind of scrutinizing what they're spending with the reseller or the managed service provider. Then they start looking at the numbers on the tool itself. We're now in a position where we're helping them move to another tool because of that vendor relationship. It wasn't the tool itself. They know that the tool is more than capable, but because they were getting so frustrated with the relationship, people started to kind of pick away at what the money that was being spent and how much value they're getting. And now we're in a position where we're helping them think about a new tool, which is probably going to cost them less than 50% of what they're spending with their current tool to get all of the same functionality and more. But all that whole conversation has all come from being unhappy with the reseller stroke managed service provider rather than the tool itself. They love the tool. But that's really interesting, right? It doesn't have to be the tool that's leading to the frustration. If you're spending a lot of money on a tool and the vendor's not looking after you, or the reseller's not looking after you, that can be the pulling of the thread, and it all unravels. And then that's it. Bye-bye tool, bye-bye vendor. We're going to another.
And that speaks directly to your point, David, about that collaborative. You need to have that collaboration between parties, and that relationship needs to be solid. All right, so moving on then. So thinking again on this scenario with a mythical customer that we've been talking about. For whatever reason, it's been determined that the tool set that they have isn't fit for purpose. They've looked at their strategy. The tooling isn't going to enable that over the period of time, the number of years. How are you then perhaps helping those organizations, those people, sort of work out what they need to be looking at and evaluating when they go to market? What are your kind of go-to themes that you would run by them, saying, right, okay, and I'm sure some of it's going to map to the strategy, but are there any kind of catch-alls that you'd apply in any and all cases?
I'll grab that one, shall I, David?
Yeah,
so, we mentioned the whole assessment thing earlier on, and this is where it really comes into play to sit with people, both people within delivery functions, but also within the business, and that can be IT or ESM. It doesn't really matter whether it's a HR team or a finance team or an IT team. There's sitting with people, understanding what they do today and how effective they are at that, and critically then, where are you trying to get to? So the very nature of carrying out an assessment, of course, based on some common frameworks, is helping people think about benchmarking what they do today against best practice, and then agreeing whether we think that's an okay position or whether you're trying to get to somewhere else. So most organizations are trying to get to somewhere else, right? Most organizations that we come across, for a whole plethora of reasons, need to improve. And a lot of that is basic stuff because they're taking their eye off the ball over the last 5 years, trying to do other shiny things or be more agile and so on. So a lot of organizations do want to improve. So the very nature of carrying out the assessment and to benchmark them, and we give them a score, but as we've talked about many, many times, the score is the least important output. More importantly, we can help them build a roadmap and say, right, if you're here today, where are you trying to get to? And that could be around improving service or saving money or having better control of their assets, or they might be considering a longer term outsource move. So they need to get their ducks in a row to be able to outsource it. So there's often many, many different reasons why we might do an assessment or, of course, a new tool. But the very nature of sitting with people and asking them what they do today and what they would prefer to be able to do gives us the ability to help them build that roadmap. And then, of course, we can start thinking about, okay, well, actually, everything that you're saying you want to do over the next 3 to 5 years, well, you can actually do that in this tool. Did you know that you've got this functionality or that functionality? Sometimes we can advise on that personally because of our level of understanding with tools. Or sometimes, of course, we might need to turn to guys like yourself and say, look, we're a little bit out of our depth in some of these questions. Can you now talk to the customer about some of their functionality tool X or tool Y. So we're agnostic with tools, as you know, which gives us a level of understanding, but not to the level that Accession would have, for example. But it really gives us that ability to think about what functionality we want to take advantage of, if that's around agentic AI or chatbots or automation of some description, or it could be really, really basic stuff. A lot of organizations still operate at the basic realms of incident request, problem change, knowledge, catalog, those things that have been around for a long time that are really important, that still need a lot of improvement, whether that's about AI readiness or just stability, in their business. So, but back to the assessment, it's the very nature of doing it. It enables us to think about what we're trying to achieve. And then we can have some sensible conversations around whether the existing tool is going to be of any use, or whether they want to go off on a journey for a new tool, of course, and then what that might look like. And often, as you all know, more than anyone, Sunil and Daniel, being able to present a selection of tools to a client based on where they're trying to get to is a really powerful position and a really good USP with you guys, because it might be that we say, well, you don't really need that big shiny one in the top right-hand corner that Gartner says you might need. These ones down here will do everything that you want to do, and they may cost you a little bit less and maybe a better fit for you as an organization. So there isn't any hard and fast, these are all the things we look for. Daniel, to answer your initial question, I guess it's more about when we do an assessment, thinking about what topics or practices, if we're looking at it from an ITIL perspective, of course, what areas are you most interested in? Let's assess those in terms of how you work today and where you're trying to get to, and then we can match that to a tooling requirement. Does that answer your question, Daniel?
It does indeed. It does indeed. I was just curious whether, David, if you had any thoughts on that as well. So it's like from a customer point of view, these are some key things. Or, I mean, for me, Tim summed it up brilliantly. But
absolutely, I think it just falls to me just to take it to a slightly higher level, which is when you work with organizations and you grow to understand them, whether it's via an assessment or literally just via conversation, you can there's certain cues you can pick up, clues, sorry. So, if they're an organization that's looking for innovation and speed, and they're looking to add stability to that, then you might go out of the box. It might be that simple, because they just want to get it in quick. They want it to work. They know exactly what they want. They're very clear on the requirement, and an out of the box will usually do probably 80 to 90% of what they need, which means they're only potentially wasting 10 to 15%, which they could probably work into in the future. But if they are regulated, if they have certain standards they have to hit, then maybe you do have to go and look at something a bit more complex, a bit more tailored. But again, you only learn really what they need through conversation, through conducting an assessment, through understanding what value means to them. And so Tim hit all the nails on the head. But I guess what I'm saying is there are generically very high level two types of organization. There's those that are regulated heavily, and there are those that are seeking speed, innovation.
mm-hmm.
And once you can know whereabouts you're moving them this way or that way, you can then start to focus much more on the tool that's appropriate for their needs. Then you can start solutionizing from there.
I think that's so interesting what you've said there, and I'll tell you why. Because, and maybe it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this. When you get a tender, or you see a tender for tooling, how often do those sorts of ideas feature in the tender? How often do you get questions about how will you support our business from an agile change perspective? How quickly can you do X, Y, Z? Or, how can you evidence the nature of the relationship that you as a vendor or as a reseller will have with us as an organization to support our needs? It's almost never there, is it? But yet, actually, it's your tool has to be able to do feature A, feature B, feature C, must, should, could, have. But actually what you guys are saying is that the relationship, and Matt Berron said this as well, that the relationship with the vendor and their supporting cast is super important. The way in which the features are delivered to support overarching business activities are potentially more important than the features themselves, because they are so closely aligned to ITIL and best practice anyway. They come out of the box in that fashion. I mean, have you helped customers put tenders together that try and reflect some of these other things?
I think that the timing of your question is quite spooky in a way, to be perfectly honest. So,
well, you lined it up, David, for me, so you know.
Genuinely, we were recently engaged to help with a tender on behalf of an MSP who were looking to work with a potential client. Now, that potential client had a series of questions which actually did focus on: how are you going to manage the relationship? How are you going to work with us? Where will your people be? What skills will they use? And that's why they came to us, because they could talk about the tool. They could talk about the geographical location of their teams and all that good stuff. Where we were able to help was how that should work in practice and how that should work from a relationship perspective. But also in the particular case of this customer, they also have objectives around sustainability, around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we were able to start to tailor the answers based on what they should be seeking to do for the future. So that's probably the first and only tender I've ever seen that actually did go for those things. But what I would say is, in addition to that, and it's a slight segue, but I do some work with the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. I sit on the committee for ISO 20000, which means I also represent the UK for BSI and the British Computer Society. And now we're starting to write standards around sustainability, around experience, around DNI, DE&I. So there's the old saying, isn't there? The last thing to catch up with technology is law. And I think closely behind that is process and standards. So what we're beginning to see now is processes and standards are beginning to catch up with technology because they're being dragged by the technology. And I think that plays to your question, because human behavior, human interactions are essentially elements of processes and standards that have been forgotten for too long. But now they're being brought into focus, and I think that's improving our ways of working, and that will, in my mind at least, in the near future, begin to improve the technology and how we implement it. It's a long-winded answer, but you got me off on one.
And I think the regulatory question is or observation is a really interesting one as well. And I tend to agree with you, Sunil. Apart from maybe that example that David just referenced, it's very rare that people talk about how they're regulated or not. And we often find, when we're thinking about what best practice looks like for a lot of organizations, many organizations aren't ready, not just for the new shiny tools, but the new shiny frameworks. So many organizations need to work with some of those things that have been around for a very long time because of the very nature of what they do. And they have to be belts and braces from a change process, all those kind of things, because they get audited so heavily. So some of the new, faster ways of working, shall we say, might never work for those organizations, or at least not for a very long time, because of the level of audit and so on that they have to be governed by. So we often find with many organizations actually a blend of, let's use ITIL as an example, maybe a blend of ITIL v3 with some aspirational activities around the guiding principles of ITIL 4 might be perfect for a regulated organization, rather than just saying we need to be this or we need to be that. Well, you can actually mix, and it might be a blend of SIAM and a few other frameworks in there as well. There's no one size fits all, I guess, is what we're saying when it comes to frameworks or tools for that matter. It's a really, really interesting point.
It really points, I have to say, to the value that a third-party organization like yourselves, like ITSM People, could have to organizations that are making, significant choices about their, their IT enterprise service management strategies moving forward in the, in the long term, and making sure that they do align in a practical way to business strategic objectives as well.
Definitely. So just back to our mythical customer then, and they've decided they want to have a new tool. There's been an evaluation. They've gone to market with what they think they need. How are you helping them kind of refine requirements? How do they then assess what comes back from the various vendors who replied to a tender? And then when you're, because you guys are very much around the process side of things, when it comes then to, right, we've decided what we want to use from a tooling point of view, then to engage with an organization like Accession from an implementation process aspect. How are you working with that client? What are your kind of go-tos to work with that client to absolutely ensure like that everybody's very happy and that any implementation or professional services work is successful?
I'll get that one initially if you want. So, as you guys know, we very much come from the people and process perspective. So when we're thinking about, or when the client's thinking about choosing a vendor, and ultimately it is their choice, not ours, we try and act independently, but we try and help them think about some of the things that might catch them out. So we'll often look at cultural fit as well. It's not just about tools. So is Accession as an organization a good fit for you as an organization? And sometimes scale of organizations can be a big challenge. So it's not, some of it's about, well, a lot of it is about the tool, but let's think about how well you're going to get on. We talked about the relationship danger earlier on, how you can fall out, and then that unravels the tooling conversation as well. So I think, there's always the cultural fit that we try and advise on about, the people aspect. But in terms of how you might govern an implementation, I think we just need to be really clear from the outset. What does good look like? What are we trying to measure from a business perspective? It's not just about what SLAs the IT team want, of course, and some organizations are moving to XLAs, a lot still aren't. But what does good look like? Let's make sure we've got the right governance in place from the outset between your organization and theirs. And sometimes we will help police, it's probably a strong word, but help guide some of these implementations, or sometimes we'll just help choose the vendor and the tool, and then we'll step away, or we might do a bit of business change work. But being really upfront, and we've had a good example of this, not so long ago, where the governance wasn't put in place from the outset, and it caused problems down the line. So we'd always encourage, let's be clear, what does good look like, both in terms of the implementation, but more importantly, what does the onward journey look like? So when we're thinking about product management, I talked about this earlier on, we often come across the challenge where an organization will go and secure a load of funding for a new tool, and they'll go and get whatever it is. Let's say it's £1 million for argument's sake, and then they do the implementation, and that's great. But then there's no money in the budget for the next 3 to 5 years to manage the tool, which is a huge mistake. So comes back to the roadmap, I guess. But where are you trying to get to? And let's make sure you can fund that journey as well. And then let's be clear from the outset what that looks like with your vendor, because if you've only bolted into your contract 15 hours a month of incident and request management support and no project agreement, and you haven't budgeted for then how are you going to manage that? In no time at all, you're going to be falling out with your vendor or your tool, and round we go. And then they start again, and then they're going to go and choose a new tool. And it's a really common mistake that we see a lot. So I think being really clear on what does the implementation look like from the outset? What does good look like? What does the onward journey look like? It's really, really important. And think about measuring business success, not IT. And I'm using IT as the example there, but that could be HR team, finance team, or whatever. And sometimes that might be an enterprise-wide solution, but really important to think about where the business is trying to get to and what outcomes we're trying to achieve. David, anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think what you've done actually is set me up nicely. You've done a really good job of covering it from the strategic and leadership point of view. But then you've got the people on the ground that have got to use this thing and develop this thing and implement this thing. And through our assessment, we've worked with organizations where some of the questioning is around, why does this organization exist? What is it there to do? What's its vision and its mission? And I remember one particular organization where everybody was absolutely on point on what the organization's mission and vision is. So then I asked them, how do you contribute towards that? And suddenly they have to take a pause and a moment. And some people honestly couldn't answer how their day-to-day contributed towards this organization's vision. And this isn't just IT people, although predominantly. It's people in the people part of the organization, in properties across the organization. And the reason I go down to that level is If you then put a tool that those people cannot use, that isn't conducive to them and their day-to-day, then it's going to fail. But equally, if you can't bring people together so they can understand how their day-to-day can exploit that tool, then you're also going to fail. It's business change, essentially. So a lot of the work we do is we create communities of practice. It's something we've been doing now for 5 or 6 years in global organizations. And you bring people together and you build an understanding of what they do day to day that contributes towards the vision and the mission of that organization. Then you grow to understand actually what it is they need to do day to day to deliver that. And now you can start to align that with a tool. And it's never really that complex. If we're going back to service management, there are 2 key practices that deliver the greatest level of value, in my opinion, especially when you're implementing a new tool or looking to exploit an existing one. They are continual improvement, because as we've said, as a common thread throughout this whole conversation, nothing is perfect. And if we aim for perfection, we're probably never going to achieve it. The other one is knowledge management, because that is taking out of people's heads what we can use to improve the organization. And Tim alluded to this earlier. We've been working with a very large organization who are now beginning to exploit their existing tool, the tool they were about to get rid of and go into a tender process for. But not only are they exploiting its existing functionality, they've now taken on board AI. But they've only done so when we've solidified knowledge management in their organization. And not only have we sought to deliver that in IT, it's across their enterprise. So now they've got joined up knowledge management practices. They've got knowledge librarians in the right places. They've got a community of people that are designing the AI, which now when you ask it a question can give you contextual feedback based on who you are in the organization, and even reason as to you're asking that from an HR point of view, not an IT point of view. But if you're a hiring manager and it recognizes that, it can answer your question with, to do this for the HR part of the process, do this. To do this for the IT part of the process, do this. And suddenly you're saving people thousands of minutes a year. You're returning money back into the business that was previously being lost and spent. So, I mean, in reference to the question, assess a customer's requirements and define these, in my eyes, build a community of people that are focused on the greater good. Bring all of your stakeholders in from across the organization. And most critically, bring in the vendor to maintain and improve the relationship, because that's the way they're going to learn what people need.
Yeah. We've had, Dan, haven't we? We've had a few podcast guests, and I'm particularly thinking of Chris Williams, who's the CIO of Community Fibre, who talked very much about, not so much about the knowledge management piece, actually, David, but very much about the community element and also the vendor having a seat at the table, not as a supplier, but as a part of the team to drive continual service improvement moving forward. So, some organizations, I think, are already getting to grips with this. And I think your point around knowledge management is so fundamental to adoption of AI, agentic AI solutions, because the data requirement for those technologies to succeed, can't be in people's heads. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, absolutely. So
it's got to be accessible to. Sorry, I was going to say, and it has to be accessible to. In one organization, I'll take 10 seconds. We did a little bit of a test to find out how long it would take to book a room with catering. The average person who'd never done it before took them 27 minutes. Imagine you automate that.
Yeah, 27 seconds, right?
Yeah.
The cost savings were insane. Like, just think about people's time.
Insane.
I don't think we're doing other things as well, but mind-blowing how complex something so simple should be simple, and how complex you can make it if you're not presenting the right information to people in a easily consumable way.
Yeah, it's a great example. So let's wrap up with a bit of a quick fire. Top 3 do's, top 3 don'ts for our hypothetical customer that's gone through this process of evaluation. So maybe David, we'll start with you, and then we can go on to Tim.
Do you want 3 or 1?
Whatever you
One,
choose.
two,
No
well,
more than 3.
No more than 3. Okay, so I think the do is concentrate on business value and not features. I also believe that you want to engage your stakeholders as early as possible and as often as possible, and cast that net wide. Because there'll be somebody sat in the corner who's been doing the job for 30 years and there's a lot more than you do about that organization. And if you can engage them, you're onto a winner. And I've talked about knowledge and continual improvement. So maintain them once it's in and it's embedded. And you do that through building a community. So there's a 4th do, really. Build a community that does all of those 3 other things, because it will outlast any engagement. And, you know, between Tim and I, we are personally still engaged with clients of 5, 6, 7 years ago, where we helped to create communities because they still see the value in having us drop in and provide some advice. The don'ts are, don't skip that data quality work that's so important. So don't try and stick AI in when you haven't got a knowledge management process, because the data is going to be terrible. I know Tim used a famous quote in one of your previous podcasts, which I'm not going to repeat, so you don't have to put the 18 on there. But if you put
a pig instead.
Yeah. Well, if you put brown dirty stuff in, you still get brown dirty stuff out just a lot quicker than you would have done before. Don't over customize at first, because you're just going to send yourself into a spiral. And please, please, please don't assume the shiny new thing or AI is going to fix everything, because frankly, it's not.
Go on, Tim. Anything to add?
How can I add to that? Well,
Sorry.
do assess where you're at. Shameless plug. Assess where you're at and where you're trying to get to. We talked about that stat earlier on. Over 30% of organizations never either not having or never looking at their strategy. How can you be getting the best value out of your tools and so on if you don't know what you're trying to get to?
Yeah, and buying a new tool is not a strategy.
So that's the only do I would add. And I don't. Let me just add one more don't. Don't buy what you don't need. You know, we've talked about it previously, actually, when we got together a year or so ago. The amount, and we still see it all the time. You must see it all the time as well, right? I'd like to think when we engage with a client that they don't buy what they don't need, but a lot of conversations we walk into, I'm going to pick on ServiceNow. They bought ServiceNow. They're using incident request changing problem.
Yeah.
What? It costs too much, and you can argue the same. Any mid-market tool is costing you too much money to only be doing those things, right? There's so much functionality now by default in every single platform, right? Every single platform that we could rattle off on this call will give most organizations 80 to 90% of what they probably need. Don't make that mistake. Don't go and buy something where you're paying X for the license and using 20, 30, 40% of functionality. You're just wasting money. It's just putting money down the drain. There's nothing wrong with going with some sort of minimum viable product for go live, because you're not quite ready to take advantage of all that shiny stuff, but then build your roadmap for the next 3 years and think about what you introduce. CMDB, if you haven't got a CMDB, God forbid, introduce asset management, get your knowledge management capability ready, start moving towards AI. There's nothing wrong with having a minimum viable product, but don't buy something that you're not going to use, at least 80% of the functionality. It's pointless.
And all of those things depend on having a strategy in place, right?
Absolutely that.
Brilliant conversation, David, Tim. Thank you very much again for taking time out to speak with us today. Some real good key themes. I think collaboration, relationships seem to be kind of a key area here. If you'd like to find out more about what the ITSM people do and how they can help you, reach out. Sunil and I can put you in touch, or get in touch with Tim and David directly. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.